All right. Good evening, everybody. Happy Tuesday is the first day of the month. And I think with December also brought a chill here in Indianapolis. So if you're in Indianapolis, I think you got some new weather today, but we are excited to be here. My name is David McGuire, and I'm the principal at Tindley Summit Academy. I'm here with some amazing educators and honestly doing something that I don't think many schools do an awful lot. And so we are collaborating during this time, sharing resources, something that was kicked off actually last spring with the folks that's joined us who spearheaded an initiative in our city. And so now as we enter, for many of us, what I call phase 3 of virtual learning or remote learning, we're here again talking through what we've learned the first time in the spring of last year and how we're trying to be better. And so just really excited and honored. And I did want to say first, for us, Tina and I at Tindley Summit, what an honor and privilege it is, because not too often do you have schools that are high performing, willing to open themselves up and share and collaborate. And so we're just appreciative that we have a school like Paramount in our city that is also leading the charge, but more importantly, they're open to collaborating and sharing. So Tommy, for your leadership, thank you for the opportunity, and we're excited about diving in. And so folks, it's going to seem like a conversation just amongst us, but if you see at the bottom there, if you're in the comments, I hope you'll jump in, what state you're in, your name and your position and where you're from. So hop in there, and then we'll do Q&As here at the end. But first, we'll start off with a round of introductions. Again, I'm David McGuire, principal at Tindley Summit Academy, located in Indianapolis, and I'll kick it off to Tina Cowan.
Hi, I'm Tina Cowan, and I am one of the assistant principals at Tindley Summit Academy.
And I'm Tommy Reddick, CEO, Paramount Schools of Excellence. And just to tag into what David said, it's definitely not a one-sided affair. And we're pretty honored to also be on with Tindley and be collaborating in our sector here in our state and around the country. So excited for that, and I'll shift it over to Kyle.
Evening, everybody. My name is Kyle Beauchamp, and I'm the Chief Academic Officer for Paramount Schools, and I'll shift it over for Jess to introduce herself.
Hi, my name is Jess Monk. I'm the COO at Paramount, and I'll take you to Darius, our principal at Inglewood.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Darius Sawyers, and I'm the principal of our third campus of PSOE at Paramount Inglewood, a 5th through 8th grade middle school in Indianapolis.
So folks, now that you've had introductions, we're going to go through a series of topics that we have talked about and things that we feel are important. We encourage you that as we're talking, if there's something that you like, again, jump in the comments. If you have something along those lines to an approach that you're doing at your school, again, this is an open forum. We want to share resources and collaborate. Again, this is an online collaboration. And so with our first one, we'll start off with Paramount. So we'll do a little alternating. So they'll lead the first one, then we'll share. And so our first one is very simple. So what does virtual instruction look like?
Yeah, I'll dive in on this on our end and just say, from a top level view of virtual instruction, I think one of the key points to raise for parents, communities, for schools is that there needs to be a daily schedule that mirrors regular academics in an on-campus environment. And I think sometimes we get so wrapped up in the fear of the situation within the pandemic that, oh no, we're going into virtual learning. All right, how long are we going to teach during a day? All right, let's do 2 hours of teaching, go. And the structure of that process needs to be a lot better defined, and I'll tee it up to Kyle to talk a bit more about that on our end.
Thanks, Tommy. I just want to start by saying something you all already know. This is complex and uncharted territory for all of us. This is really challenging. It's hard work. We're still learning. We're all learning, and we're excited to be here tonight to share some best practices. And we sure hope there's some things that you can glean from us and from Tindley that you can integrate into your own systems. I'm going to kind of take it back a little bit to the spring when we were in. I liked how David said phase 3 of this process. When we were in phase 1 of the process back in the spring, there was a lot we learned. We felt like we had good systems in place. We got an early start on the preparation process for virtual learning. But when we came out of virtual learning, as data-driven as we stayed, and as much as we supported our families and our students and our teachers and our support staff through the process, we knew that we had a ways to go. And the first point of reference in terms of making those improvements was to go to our teachers and our support staff and survey them and really break down that data and take a look at where we need to go from here in case we were going to be in virtual, which we have been throughout the course of the 2021 school year. So we were able to get some outstanding feedback, and a lot of what we're going to talk about today, starting with the daily schedule, was born out of some really cool feedback and conversations we had with our teachers. They're on the front lines of this, as is our support staff, and we really listened and learned from them. There's a couple things to consider when you're developing your daily routine. The first is, and Tommy already kind of mentioned this, is we like to maintain as much consistency as possible. We all crave routine. Students crave routine. Teachers, staff, leaders, we all crave routine to a certain degree. We tried to adapt as much of our systems as we possibly could to the virtual environment. So that was a big part of what we wanted to do. So we really did a full-scale survey of our systems to say, all right, these are some things we can take into the virtual environment. And we really learned early on in the process that there's some pretty cool things that we can do with our system that work in this space. The second thing is, when designing our daily schedule, we tried to find the right balance between rigor, the complexity of student work, holding students to high expectations, but also making it sustainable for the child and the family. I think that's so important throughout this process, is to make sure we're not overwhelming families, that they're a partner with us in this process. And we tried to strike that balance there in holding kids to high expectations, but also making it sustainable for the families. Third thing is building in teacher planning time. This was absolutely born out of some of those surveys we did with our staffs early on. It's so important to build in time for teachers to plan and to collaborate with each other. One of the biggest takeaways we got from our teachers out of our survey was that this felt really isolating to them. So we wanted to create more authentic opportunities to allow them to collaborate with each other, plan. Now we plan across our district, across our network by grade level. So they have an opportunity not only to collaborate with teachers in their own departments, in their own buildings, but amongst grade levels across our network. So that's been really exciting. The last thing is, like Tommy said, we mirror our virtual programming after our own model. So we want to make sure that everything we do in terms of instruction that we possibly can integrate into virtual learning, we are doing. So David, if you could for me, pull up the daily schedule. I'd like to kind of narrate through that a little bit. So we broke our daily schedules down by K2, 3, 5, and 6A, and this really does mirror our academic day on campus pretty well. The day starts out, and this is just K2, but there'll be a lot of similarities between the three sectors. The day starts out with something we call title time. It's a morning routine. Students are logging on to the Google Classroom platform, which I'll talk about in a little bit. They're chatting with each other. They're getting some work done. They're working on, some concepts they may have covered yesterday. There's a live lesson that kicks off early in the morning at 9 o'clock. One of the things that we did that we really learned in the spring is we scaled down the K2, so the lower elementary live lessons a little bit. I have a son that's in kindergarten, and, I saw him do a lot of whole class live lessons last year. And boy, it's adorable. It's cute, but I'm not so sure we were getting what we wanted to get out of those. So we're still doing them, just not to the same degree we're doing them at the upper elementary and middle school levels. So we do one live lesson on Mondays. That is followed immediately by our cycle of instruction with independent practice and ELA. We do another live lesson in the afternoon in math, followed by independent practice, some sort of a standards-based exit ticket. We also have specials integrated into the daily routine at all grade levels. That would be our extended core classrooms, art, music, PE, and Spanish. And then, as you'll notice here, plenty of teacher work time. I think that's really important. Another thing I wanted to name really quickly on the K2 side, we're doing a lot more with small group live instruction with K2, and then also one-on-ones every week where they're being assessed in reading comprehension and fluency. We want to make sure that we're not just assessing students 3 times a year. We want to continue to aggressively monitor, especially at those early levels, those foundational reading skills to make sure those students are where they need to be. So those quick progress monitoring checks and assessments happen during those one-on-one sessions with their teachers weekly. We also leverage our instructional assistants for that, just not to burden the classroom teacher, because that is an awful lot of work. Off to the right there, we during the course of the year had about 50% of our kids, our families and students choosing virtual, another 50% on campus. So we were having our virtual staff. So we kind of split up our staff to just support our virtual students, still in observing our on-campus teachers once a week. We felt that was very, very important in terms of aligning instruction between on-campus and virtual. But now we're all virtual, so we're certainly in the same boat. So David, are you able to scroll down? I can talk really quickly through 3.5 and 6.8. As you'll notice, the big difference here is there's more live lessons. There's opportunities to get live lessons done twice a day, Monday through Thursday. We wanted to make sure we intentionally built in Fridays as time for office hours, assessments, and make sure teachers can work ahead. So Fridays are a little more flexible with our staff. In middle school, it's very similar. If you just want to roll down to that real quick, that'll be the last thing I cover here. On the middle school side, there's live lessons, but we're departmentalized in middle school. So the live lessons are a little more scattered. I think if you go down to the next slide, there's our live lesson schedule, which is a little more robust for our middle school to make sure our students are getting all their departmental lessons in ELA, math, social studies, and science. So that's how the daily routine works. And we feel good about where we're at in terms of how that aligns to our normal traditional routine.
Coming out of that, I think just touch on a couple points about the difference between parent expectations and obligations, and I'll let Jess run with that one real quick.
Yeah, one thing we noticed when we started our virtual program in the fall was we had teachers getting an influx of frustrated and angry phone calls from families that they didn't necessarily get before. And so we've been really mindful on how we prepare teachers for that, and then also, helping them to react in a supportive way, because there are a lot of stressors for families right now, like unfamiliar tech, feelings of frustration, them worried about their kids falling behind, and all of that comes from a really real and good place because they want their kids to succeed, and they just don't necessarily know how to do that in this new environment. And so we've really been mindful on making sure there's a differentiation between obligations and expectations of parents. There are a lot of things that we would like for them to do, but really what we need parents to do, make sure your kids log in, just like you make sure they come to school. It's the same kind of thing. It's just logging in is like taking your kid to school in a virtual environment, making sure kids finish all of their assignments as best they can, and then making sure that they call if they need help. So we're not expecting parents to have all of the answers, to be a computer technician, to fix their router, to do all of the things that are necessary for a student to be successful. But we do want them to call when they need help. So making sure they have those tools and that they feel comfortable to call and ask for help with the appropriate people.
So that's kind of the Paramount perspective on what virtual instruction looks like. I think we're really curious from the Tindley side what you guys have going there.
Yeah, so I'll kick it off. I think we started the same approach you did. We had an idea in the spring, put together, and we're gonna get everything that we would do during the school day, and we're gonna do it the exact same way online. The first pushback we got was from the students. The scholars had more of the pushback, and then it went to the parents, and then I think the teachers had the pushback but didn't really speak up yet. But I think they found the power from the students and the parents and said, hey, we got to really look at this again. But like everybody, it was new, and we were just trying to keep the momentum that we had started. And so we said, we're going to jump right into it. So we don't have the copy, but Tina Cowan, when she talks about the schedule, she created it. It's her baby. She knows it like the back of her hand. But I think one of the things we wanted to do was when we looked at our curriculum, and we'll talk about curriculum, but we said, what are the key components for each grade level that must have? What are our must-haves? And so we have some must-haves, whether it's virtual or whether it's in person, that we have to do. And so when we identify those must-have, that's how we built our schedule. So I'll let Cowan take it more in detail what our schedule looks like for our K-6 scholars.
Yeah, so we knew that this time the schedule had to be different. Everything happened so quickly in the spring. We were not prepared for our scholars to do our curriculum, especially in K2, because at the time they did not have technology. And so as we reflected back, now that they do have technology, some of the issues had been, what about those developmental skills, getting the phonics, and just being able to use the curriculum, because they came back and we are noticing gaps, and parents had concerns as well. So I had started planning even in May, looking forward into the fall, thinking, if we go virtual again, what's that going to look like? And just in collaboration with Instruction Partners, who we team up with through the year, we knew that we were going to follow our curriculum. So I started working on a schedule. Again, we wanted to provide some consistency. I think we had kind of the opposite with our K1. We needed them to have these live lessons with the teachers because everything is so hands-on for them in class. So they needed to be able to see things. So we actually have a lot of live going on, because the other thing we saw is that once they log off, it's hard to get them to log back on. So we start our day at 8:15, and they have everything's in 30-minute blocks. And so they have their phonics, and they have literature with some writing, and then they're off screen for about 2 hours, and then come back on for about an hour and 20 minutes for math. And their day is done by 2:30. The off screen time that happens mid-morning, teachers are then pulling small groups. We use Dibbles, and so our teachers are progress monitoring even through virtual. They have a calendar they follow, so they're setting up individual times to do that assessments, because we just want to make sure we have a very clear pulse on where our kids are. The other reason we wanted to make sure we were following the curriculum is that we're hoping that we will be coming back, and we want to be able to just pick up where we left off. So K1 follows that same schedule. It got a little bit trickier in the grades where we have departmentalized. In second and third grade, we have 3 teachers that share that responsibility, and we wanted to make sure they got to all 3 teachers. So all of their core learning happens in the morning, and then they have off-screen time. Again, there are some individual supports, but their afternoon is then built in. The teachers rotate for second grade supports, third grade supports. We're making sure we're doing some I-read skills with our third graders and things like that. So all of that is happening in the afternoon. Fourth grade was able to pretty much follow their same schedule that they do during the day. And then with fifth and sixth grade, they're departmentalized as well. And theirs was pretty on point. The only thing we didn't work into a daily schedule was the specials time that takes place on Friday. Our teachers don't do any live lessons on Friday. This is a time for them to do planning. Like I said, our day ends between 2:30 and 2:45, and since teachers are contracted to 4:30, they have a good amount of time to get their planning done. And then on Fridays also, they can touch base with any scholars that they were concerned about. This is also a time to reach out to scholars that were not in attendance, but it's definitely more rigorous than what we did in the spring. But we're also, I think the teachers feel more comfortable because they're going forward with the curriculum. I haven't heard as many questions as, well, what happens when we come back and we haven't covered this standard and we haven't done this? Where are we going to pick up in the curriculum? They just seem a little more confident to be moving forward. And I do just have to say, I've been so proud of, especially our K1, where it's tricky with those live lessons. These teachers have set some amazing expectations, and it's so awesome to get in those classrooms and just see the kids engaging and following the expectations the teachers have, but still feeling like a part of the class. So I've just been really proud of them. So I just wanted to shout that out. Is there anything you wanted me to cover that I missed?
No, that was it. So we did have a question, and thanks for everybody that hopping in the comments. I want to name some. If you're on the YouTube page, it is requiring you to make a YouTube account to comment, which is free. So I hope you would do that. But if not, if you have a Facebook page, if you go to Tindley Summit Academy on Facebook, that video is streaming live there as well. So you can pop in the comments. So we did have a comment that was sent to me via text. A good friend of both schools, Tina Seymour, she asked a really good question, and it's centered around, I have it pulled up here. I want to make sure I capture it correctly. She wanted us to talk about how we manage the logistics with small group instruction. I think that's the big thing. And so it's funny, in our leadership call today, we were talking about our MTSS program. And if one of those interventions was for a kindergarten or first grade student to get OG, what would that look like, and what staff member will we deploy to do that? And so we have instructional assistants, we have instructional assistants, but we also have our special teachers. So as mentioned, with our special teachers not teaching, they are assigned a schedule to go into a classroom and support. So while they're in there to do chat support and making sure they field questions, if need be, prompted by the teacher can create breakout rooms where that teacher, along with the other teacher, can split the class in half and do small groups. We also utilize office hours. And so what we learned in iteration number 3 was we have to also structure office hours. We can't just blanketly say office hours is this time. So what we told teachers to do is look at your student roster, look at students where they were during the live lesson, identify the gaps, again, quickly. So we're asking a lot of teachers in the moment to identify gaps, identify pitfalls, and then in that moment say, okay, I need 1, 2, 3, 4. I need you guys at this time to come and be in a small group. And then that teacher, in that hour, 2 hours that they have off, they're spending some of that time planning what that small group instruction would look like, and then they're hopping on with students to close that gap. Again, what teachers are learning is not what we will ask them to do necessarily in the classroom. Typically, small group will happen for us at the end of the day, or possibly we have the next day. So we're asking them in the moment to identify those gaps, close those gaps, and create those small groups. And so we're using office hours. And as Tina mentioned, because we don't have school on Friday, teachers do have a block from 8 to 11:30 every Friday that they can say, okay, I'm gonna pull some small groups this time. And in that block, you can get 2 to 3 small group instruction in as well. So again, it's a process that we're learning, but we have teachers right now on the spot managing that small group. It's not perfect, it's not ideal, but it's still an opportunity to make sure that students who need that one-on-one, especially our SPED scholars and our ELL scholars, get that. So the group from Paramount, how are you guys managing that small group instruction?
Very similar, David, and I love what you had to say about leveraging other support staff to help with that process. I think it takes a village to support students in this environment. So I really appreciate that you said that. Very similar fashion. We are pulling kids at the end of live instruction, and a lot of that is based on scanning for students who may not have fully understand or grasp that concept, keeping them on for a reteach. And I'll talk about this a little bit more later in our cyclical instruction explanation, but keeping them on for a reteach. And then we also have our progress monitoring that runs off of our data. It's very data driven. And they're homogeneous groups so that students are getting what they need. And generally those groups are about 4 to 5. And that certainly goes with our MTSS program.
Before we move to the next topic, I'll touch briefly on the communication piece. And so again, parent obligations. We have a simple saying. The first one is we tell our parents, relax. I think it begins and ends with relax. And then we also tell them, I need you, and I think, Jess, you hit on a point. I need you to be the parent, not the teacher. So I need you to make sure your child gets logged on. They're in a conducive space for learning. They have the materials, whatever that is. So as Tina mentioned, we did have to send some packets home with kindergarten and first grade because it aligns to the curriculum. So making sure they have that, making sure they have a sharpened pencil, making sure that they have on appropriate clothing and they ate breakfast, all those things that you would do as you were putting them in the car. We want you to do the same thing. We tell they don't have to put on their uniform. While we do have some parents that make their students put on their uniform, but we just ask you to be the parent, not the teacher. And let us do the teaching part and then work alongside of us as we collaborate with this. But the first thing we always tell is relax. And so for parents that are listening, whether you're a teacher and you're a parent, as Kyle mentioned, right? relax. So in that space with your child, we just tell you to relax, be the parent, not the teachers, and work with us. And so that's our big obligation. I think it aligns to the same thing that the group from Paramount said as well. So we'll switch gears and we'll kick this off. So communication. I think if there's one thing that I believe everyone did in the spring was over communicate, because we had to. We had to be transparent about what it is that we're doing. We had to be transparent by saying, okay, this is new. So ask you to give us some grace, some patience, and show some empathy as we work through this. But that didn't change that we were going to be relentless in figuring this out. But we communicated that. So what we did was the platform that we're on, StreamYard, was birthed from the plan of how we could communicate. Tina knows that I'm big with this tech stuff and the podcasting. And so what we did leading up in the spring was Tina, myself, and our other assistant principal, Kyle Gavin, we did a series of virtual chats where we just hopped on, told parents, you can get on if you want. If not, we'll share it and we'll just talk about what our plan is, and it allowed them to hear what we're thinking and best communicate. We use Class Dojo. We beefed up our social media. We continue to use our Views from the Top, which is our nightly newsletter, to communicate schedule changes, teacher changes, whether we move some teachers around or move kids around or what we were thinking. And then we had a series of chats with each grade level. And we said, what is it that you need during this time? From a communication standpoint, from a virtual learning, what is it that you need? And Paramount hit it earlier when they said, we had to take that feedback, constructive as it was, harsh as it was, tough as it was. We had to take it, internalize it, and go back to the drawing board if need be. But communication for us, we are communicating every day. And our teachers have even now, we had our second and third grade teacher leader, Ms. Hogan, sent this phenomenal Facebook post about, expectations and things they wanted to know, and just the impact that it got from our parents and how they were so appreciative, because they were tired of, seeing the post from Mr. McGuire all the time, and just to hear from the teachers. And now teachers are saying, let me communicate my message as well. And so now that the communication is gone from the admin to the teachers, parents are seeing that, okay, the school's on the same page, they're speaking the same language. I believe that our parents, and they're in here, they're listening, and so hop in if I'm wrong, I think they will tell you they know exactly what's going on all the time. Sometimes it changes in a matter of 45 minutes, because I like to say things and then I go to Calvin and she says, wait a minute, we got to make an adjustment. And but I own it, and as a leader, you have to be okay with that. And so we make those quick changes, and our parents know that. So they know they're always on their toes, but they know we're going to give them the information they need. And so it's nothing sexy and nothing brand new, but I think the biggest thing I will say is transparency. We try to be as transparent as possible about what we're doing and how we're educating their children. So group of parents, you guys have some great things you're doing. So we'll jump in. I think it is Tommy, that's you, right? For communication.
Yeah, I'll take that. One quick story before I dive into what we did and what we're doing is, gosh, David was just describing how they got on and figured out some things on StreamYard. I was scrolling through Facebook at the start of the pandemic as schools were shut down here and we're all figuring out what's going on. And I stumbled upon his live broadcast where they were just doing mic checks and talking back and forth informally and not doing a lot in terms of education. They were just figuring it out. And I was transfixed because I was watching this thing happen going, this is cool. I don't know how they're pulling this off. This is tech that we haven't gotten that far down the river yet, but I was immediately drawn in by the fact that you were doing a 30 to 45 minute sound check with your administration and live on Facebook. And my whole team heard about it. And it immediately started us thinking about how we can get out and start doing some live Facebook events. We had Darius doing live events probably 2 weeks after that. So kudos to you for giving us some of that inspiration. One of the things we did early, and I agree with you, David, communication is messy. Communication in a pandemic is flat out sloppy. You can communicate 24/7 and still have to change your communication plan 24 hours later. There's no way to carve the smooth path with communication. So the point is, how many of these battles can you win before you play? And that means how many avenues of communication can we have open and can we have accessible and available for our parents and for our teachers, for our students? And that led us, before we even started, into the concept of call centers. And when we say call centers, we say 12 hours, 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. access to one of our staff, no matter what, during the school week. This was kind of a huge tenet that we stood on before we even opened up in virtual, to say that we know there's going to be questions, we know there's going to be changes, there's going to be dynamic flexibility in what's going on, and our parents are going to need a way to figure out how to navigate this. And the best way is to call one of us and walk the walk with us, and we'll help you through that. So the call center approach is ongoing. It's something we're still using and committed to as we move forward in a virtual state. The other thing is creating strong routines. I think you said it really well when you said that you've got your regular routine ways for parents to access communication and changes through your school. And if there isn't a routine in place that parents know, hey, on Tuesday nights, I'll go figure out what's going to happen on Wednesday. Or on Friday, I'm going to know everything that's going to happen for the following Monday, because the school always does their updates on X time and X day. I think that kind of routine is super strong. And I'll hand it off to Kyle and then Jess to talk about how to intervene in communications and some of those communication plans.
Sure. So I think at the launch of virtual learning back in phase 1 in the spring, we wanted to make sure parents felt comfortable. And that's certainly something that we still want now as we launch back into virtual learning. I'd like to go over our welcome call frameworks and process. David, if you could pull that up for us, please. I can narrate us through that briefly. The welcome call was something that we designed as a leadership team and teachers to really kind of dive into what parents are going to need to feel comfortable with supporting their child during virtual learning. So we continue to make these calls every day until the parent feels comfortable with the process. So eventually, and trust me, this happened, parents were telling our teachers, don't call anymore. We got this. But that's what we want to hear. We want to make sure that we get to that point, and then we'll scale back the communication and use other modes of communication. But we still try to call 2 times a week in addition to email and other forms of communication, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Some things that we cover in the welcome call process, an explanation of PSOE virtual learning, explanation and navigation of Google Classroom. We also give some really cool one-pagers out that narrate parents through some of these things, like even little things. We always say, don't assume things. Don't assume that people necessarily know how to work a Chromebook. So we have some tutorials available for that, but we want to make sure parents feel comfortable in even navigating those one-pagers. An overview of the call center process, which Tommy kind of already talked about. And we want to make sure they know they're a partner with us in this. We're here to support and ensure students are learning and growing. We have very high expectations for this program, as we all should. The last thing we do is a home Wi-Fi inventory. We make sure that any resources and supports that these families need, including potential hotspots, we can take care of for them. But we just want to make sure that they feel comfortable throughout this process. We'll continue to cover these things each day until they are.
Jess, your thoughts on communication plans?
Yeah, I really liked what David said earlier about just the relaxed message. I think anytime that we communicate with families and with students, if we come across as put together and we come across as relaxed and confident that everything's going to work out, then that's going to transfer over to families, and then that's going to transfer over to kids, and that's going to make them feel more confident in this new arena that they're trying to navigate. And one of the ways that we did that early on was to have a solid communications plan in place. So really, we just update it with all the new what ifs for both staff and families. So, what if a student doesn't log in? What if they have repeated absences? What if families need help accessing materials? And that just kind of goes on and on and on. And then we make sure to include in that plan, so who to notify, how do we dispense the information, what format is it in, how many formats is it in, when does it go out, how often does it go out, who's responsible for it, what's the oversight, how do we talk to non-English speaking families, how do we talk to families that don't have technology aside from their student devices, what are just all of the different ways to make sure that the messaging is the same across all of our schools to all of our families to make sure they feel supported.
And we just got a question I'd love to address, if you don't mind, David, from Onder, talking about the call center and how we made sure different people were responding to the same number remotely. we'll be forwarding calls to different people at different times using Google Voice. Really lo-fi at first. We identified an individual number, just got cell phone numbers put in place for each of our school sites. So we had that to hand out to families. But if a family called a teacher, if they called the principal, the school secretary, called any school number and had a question, we would also spend that time to educate them on, hey, if you have any further questions, use this call center. One of us will always be there for you. And one of the key aspects of that wasn't to solve every problem, but to make sure that the problem was heard and triaged well. Because I think the most frustrating thing in communication chains is when it stops and when it's not there. And we don't want anyone making that call and coming up zeros. So for us, there was no magic to the process, although we did blast out our call center numbers pretty regularly through the process and make sure, like Kyle mentioned in our phone calls to parents, what the numbers were available to call, how they could get to their answers as fast as humanly possible.
So I think our next topic is the meaty one, and I think it's the one I think a lot of people are going to be curious to hear about. In addition to, I think the one at the end was staffing, but curriculum, right? This again, we have an obligation to teach our kids, right, regardless virtual or in person, right? That's our first and our foremost and our goal as a school, and so. We'll talk about curriculum again. So we'll go back and we'll start off with Paramount to talk about curriculum, and then we'll talk about curriculum as well from the Tindley Summit side.
Yeah, I'm happy to dive into that. So going back a little bit, we've spent the last 3 years integrating one-to-one technology within our K-8 campuses. Kindergarten just starting that process within the last 2 years. We were already using platforms like Google Classroom inside of the classroom for about the last 2 years. So it was a no-brainer to choose that as our primary platform for virtual learning. Our teachers felt a great deal of comfort with it, as did our students. So by the time we broke for virtual learning last spring, we had the majority of our 2nd through 8th graders who had a great deal of experience with it. And as a bonus, most of our primary and supplementary curriculums line up really well with Google Classroom. We didn't vet that process very much, so admittedly, it's I don't know much about any of the other options in terms of those some of those learning platforms, but I know that Google Classroom works really well for what we do. Just in general, some things to consider when integrating curriculum. If you're anything like me, you've gotten flooded with email after email about the next big thing in curriculum over the last 6 months. It's been a bit overwhelming, and I think it's important to keep your circles tight in terms of the curriculum you're using. Certainly, you want your students and your teachers to have that familiarity with the platforms that you're already using, whether that be your primary curriculum or your secondary. But if you're integrating new types of technology, make sure it's vetted by everyone from the teachers to your support staff, to your leadership teams before any of that is integrated. I think it's really important, though, that we don't overwhelm families, we don't overwhelm teachers, and certainly we don't want to overwhelm students with too many platforms, and that may be too much to manage. Second thing would be, I already kind of mentioned this, but keep it consistent with familiar platforms. Vet potential new platforms by seeing how well they align to your own academic systems. But the more familiarity you can provide your students, the better. And then the third thing is, does your curriculum platform allow for students to work independently, responsibly? Do the questions work students towards mastery? IXL is a digital platform that I'll use as an example of this. We love IXL for ELA, math, science, and social studies because, one, our students have familiarity with it, but two, IXL helps our students work towards mastery. We want to make sure during independent learning and virtual, students aren't going down that rabbit hole of continually making the same mistakes. IXL allows them to work towards mastery, which is what we want during that time. A couple of key curriculum pieces I'll just talk about really quickly. I already mentioned IXL. We love that. Another key aspect of IXL. It allows us to differentiate really well. Students can work at any level at any time, and it's easy for a teacher to differentiate within IXL, which we love. A couple other curriculums we use. NewsELA is great for writing and reading comprehension. It also integrates really well to Google Classroom. Smarter Balanced is a new one. It was kind of born out of the American Institutes of Research, who is the writer of our state assessment. They have really good DOK 3 and 4 performance writing tasks that we use for our 3rd through 8th graders. ReadWorks is another one we use for all grade levels. Khan Academy we primarily use for middle school math. EdgeElastic has been an excellent tool. And for those of you folks who are from outside of Indiana, EdgeElastic is an excellent tool to make sure that students are getting really high quality DOK 3 and 4 type assessment questions, and they cater it to any state's state standards. We used it at the end last year, at the end of the school year, to as a pre and post test to test growth, and we were really encouraged with the results and the quality of the assessments. Really quickly on our primary curriculums, we use in K2 we use Amplify Core Knowledge for ELA. Our upper elementary uses Savvis, formerly called Pearson, and our 6th through 8 uses McGraw-Hill Study Sync. And then all of our students use K through 8 math curriculum through Savvis, Pearson, and Vision 2.0. And just as a side note, those were selected by a panel of our teacher leaders and school leaders based on the fact that they had really good digital literacy tools within them as well. So we're pretty excited about that. One more thing I wanted to hit on, David, if you could bring up the cycle of instruction. I'll just narrate that quickly, and I'll kind of talk a little more in depth about what we're doing with each cycle of instruction that happens throughout the day.
All right, Kyle, make sure I got the right one. Is this the virtual instructional cycle, correct?
Yeah, yes, it is.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm going to make sure. That's it, correct?
Yep.
Okay.
And I'll go quickly because I want to make sure Tindley has time to present some of their best practices. But each cycle of instruction lasts anywhere from an hour to an hour and a half, just based on the grade level. Everything starts with a 15 to 20 minute mini lesson. And I think it's important to name that we make sure we focus on one learning target at a time. We don't want to dilute the product by focusing on a multitude of standards at once. We want to make sure there's one standard that we're focused on throughout the lesson. And similar to what David said earlier, our teachers during that process are scanning for who's getting it and who isn't getting it. So the next step after that teacher-led mini lesson is an opportunity for our teachers to do a gradual release model, use what we call our student response systems to make sure that we are really kind of aggressively monitoring and using what I call in-game data to determine who's getting it, who's not getting it, who needs a little bit of additional remediation. At that point, the teacher makes the call really quickly and subtly to let students know which students are staying on for a reteach and which students can be advanced to independent practice. And then at the end of every lesson, we do a 5 to 10 minute standards-based exit ticket that focuses on some sort of DOK 3 or 4 either performance task or assessment style question. And there's differentiation throughout that process as well, where we add more to the platform based on students who make it done early so they can continue to stay engaged.
Darius, did you want to comment on how this kind of works from a boots in the ground perspective for Paramount at Paramount Inglewood?
Yeah, I think Kyle said it best when you think around just what are the curriculum pieces that we're using, and the platforms that he mentioned, are quintessential to what we do. I think most importantly around IXL, because just that, live feedback for students and being able to really coach students to, if you do unfortunately get a problem wrong, how to tackle that oops section in terms of walking through those steps to see how the correct answer was the correct answer. And IXL is great because students like to get 100. So it's a game to them. When they get a question wrong and their score drops, they're working just as hard to make sure they can get back up because they don't want to see that smart score drop. So I think Kyle really summed up, what we're doing from a curriculum standpoint very well. Students are working hard, teachers are working hard. just to make sure that we have the right tools. But it's the tools that make it all make sense for us.
Yeah, I think when we talk about Paramount, we're always talking about systems. We codify everything. We try to have strong frameworks for how we put everything together. But if our system of frameworks and codification and our structure is so rigid that we just grind the same mistake in over and over again, we're failing kids. And so for us, like Darius and Kyle just said, the key is making sure that the process involves student growth, and the process is taking the child down a growth trajectory and not down a drill and kill trajectory. And I think the tools that we're choosing definitely get vetted with that focus in mind. So, from a curriculum standpoint and what we're using and how we're interjecting that's kind of our focus. I'd love to hear about Tindley.
So, Cam, before you go, I got you. I think we drew a hard line with curriculum, and Cal knows where I'm going with this. One thing we weren't going to do, and I think because we was at Tindley when we adopted our curriculum with achievement first, and Tina knows like the back of her hand, and I know it because it's what we know. And so we said, whatever we do, we need to make sure that we can stick with our curriculum. And so we are a Microsoft school, and so we did take the approach when the option afforded itself to have one-to-one that we said we're going to do live lessons. So having Microsoft Teams to do live lessons, but then also having Microsoft Streams as a video warehouse to store those lessons, because we do have to understand that there are some kids that won't be able to get on live. But having a video warehouse where we can store those videos and they can watch it later and still complete the assignments, that was big for us. And so that was part of iteration one. We had live lessons, we had the storing the videos. We moved into Schoology, and we use Schoology for our warehouse, for our curriculum, our lesson plans for students to submit assignments. Those that don't know if you're familiar with Schoology, is like Canvas. It kind of looks like Facebook, but it's like Canvas for the colleges. And so Schoology is the platform that we're using, and we're happy to say we've now got Schoology all the way down to second grade. And so when Tina goes into the curriculum and how we're leveraging and how we're using Microsoft Teams and how we're using Schoology and some of the other platforms, Lexia, and I know our teacher leader, Ms. Hogan's on here, and Epic, Book, and all those other things, we'll dive into how we're trying to navigate. But again, we kept the line strong on we're going to make sure that we use our curriculum to fidelity and integrity.
Yeah, that was one of the things, as I said, as we were ending out the school year and I was thinking forward about the fall and talking with Instructional Partners, I said we have to be able to use the curriculum. We can't just take this long break. So we use achievement first. And our teachers, that's where they upload their plans, and it works very nicely because we are a Microsoft school. Schoology ties in with Microsoft. We also use Nearpod, which also ties in with Schoology and Teams. And then the nice thing about Achievement First is they were able to get access to their virtual learning. So all of their lessons are virtual through Desmos. So our math teachers have found that Desmos is really is easier than the Nearpod for the math. So some have started to play around with that, because one of the things we saw in the spring as well is that it was hard to get engagement for math. It was hard for the teachers to see what are the kids doing. And so Nearpod, I had come across it through one of my own professional developments. And I just loved how the teacher was able to see what all the kids were doing and where they were in those spaces, and they could give in the moment feedback and things like that and track it. And then we came across Desmos through Achievement First as well, which does kind of the same thing, but is easier for the math. So some teachers are using Nearpod. We're pushing that more and more. We're definitely, all of these things have been pushed in the higher grades, and we're kind of working our way down as it is a little more challenging with the younger kids. Some other platforms we use that kids are using during their learning, their independent learning time, MobiMax, Lexia, like you said, Kyle, these are things that allow them to work to be successful and achieve mastery and fill those gaps that need to be filled. They're working at their level to get there. We do use our 5th and 6th graders are using Khan Academy. ReadWorks is huge, especially homework. Our teachers are assigning that for homework. And then Miss Hogan, our teacher leader, came across Epic Books and just ran with it. And she helped kindergarten and 1st grade roll that out. And that's been very helpful to kids with IEPs, our ELL population, because it allows for them to hear the books and read the books and answer questions. She can assign books that are on their level, or just assign a book to the whole class to do for fun. And the kids love, they love epic books. But I think the biggest thing is that we just wanted to make sure that our kids were continuing to be exposed to our rigorous curriculum, and our teachers have just kind of taken it and made it their own on how they deliver it. We have some teachers that will make their own PowerPoint and they present it that way. And I just know the time that it takes for them to do that, to make sure that their kids are getting it. Another thing that's really great about Teams with being Microsoft is, and Schoology connecting to Microsoft, is the OneDrive. This is one of our teachers figured out how to provide feedback on writing through OneDrive. She could do in the moment feedback for each kid because their work was coming right to the OneDrive, and she just make comments in a different color, and then they could make those in the moment. So she was aggressively monitoring during writing virtually.
And Tina, I think another thing too, with Schoology and how it syncs, we've also been able as school leaders to give lesson plan feedback to teachers as well. And so that was big for us as well, because typically, you know, they submit their lessons and we give the lesson plan feedback and give it to them. But now that we're virtual, we can provide that lesson plan feedback virtually and can still continue those cycles of coaching for our teachers as well. So again, we hope, if you're listening, we've mentioned tons of platforms and resources. And again, if you're using some of these, that's great. If you have other platforms that you're using, please pop in the comments, share those. Again, this is about a collaborative forum. Our two schools came together to share resources. So we want to hear from you as well. So for our school leaders or parents, or the other resources that you've had, please share those out, because we want to make sure that the broader audience gets this. And I want to thank everybody again for tuning in as we continue to go through. And so we'll move now down to tech.
Hey David,
Yeah.
can I jump in
Absolutely.
before we hit that next topic? I just think you were just touching, Tina, on and actually both of you, on just videos. And you know, we heard so much early talk in the pandemic about synchronous and asynchronous, and people struggling to figure out which is the best method. And it turns out the best method is both, and that those two words get kind of used in parallels now, and they get confused everywhere. But I think the idea of recording lessons and having them there for looking at when kids or families aren't able to access the curriculum in the moment, that's valuable. But what's really turned into a high value for us is those video exemplars, that when we get it right, we're always videoing, and we can grab those exemplars. And what a great teaching tool for the rest of the staff. And those exemplars, you know, pandemic or no pandemic, are now part of the fabric of who we are, because they're so powerful when you get to see it in action like that and see it be effective. And heck, we just showed our board live video, not live, we showed the video exemplars of teacher in the classroom on campus, and then we showed them the exact same lesson being done in a virtual space, so our board could conceptualize what the same lesson looks like in both places. And it's really powerful, and it's a really cool byproduct of what we're doing.
Yeah, I think, you know, having that warehouse is key. Again, I hope we don't have, you know, iteration number 4 of this, but if we do, right, we definitely have best practices. And as we're onboarding new teachers, right, next school year, you know, I think God forbid, we hope we're not in this situation, but if we are, we have our new teachers saying, okay, you want to see best practice in a virtual setting? You know, here you go. Here's a group of videos. And so we're definitely trying to share those out. So we'll jump to the big one. I think technology is a big one. And so in this section, we're going to hit on student tech, teacher tech. Then we're going to get into the weeds of budgeting and talk about, you know, how we've had to use some of the money to pay for that. And so on our end, I'll kick it off. As Tina mentioned, iteration number 1, we were fortunate enough, and I want to give a special shout out to our Chief Operating Officer, Idris Redmond, and our CEO, Dr. Brian Metcalf, because when all of this happened, somehow they were able to get on the calls, get on the website, and get us Chromebooks for our school, at least 3 through 6, before our network 3 through 12. And so we have 3 schools, a high school, and 2 elementary schools that are K-6 and the 712 high school. So they were able to get technology. And so when we started the first round, we did have Chromebooks for students in grades 3 through 6. And so in that, we spent time getting those packed up and organized, make sure they worked, but then also making sure that we can get the platforms bookmarked on them as well to kind of save that time. But if we didn't, the teachers used that time in those first couple of days of the lesson, sharing their screen, saying, okay, we're going to go to this website. This is how you bookmark and things like that. And so that first iteration, we did have 3 through 6. Moving, when we got to the second round, we was able to think ahead, because what we did learn when we started in person is we said, you know what? As times are changing, we were late to the bandwagon of being one-to-one. But even though we plan on starting school in person, it's best that we go one-to-one now, K6, but not just go one-to-one and get the technology. Let's also learn, make sure that our students become technology literate. I think that was the big thing for us. Like, how do we make sure our kids are technology literate?
Yeah, big time.
Yeah,
Well
and
said.
so we got Chromebooks for K through 6, and from day one, Calvin can tell you, we said built-in technology time, but built-in technology time that's appropriate, and not just kids getting on there playing games, but getting on kids where you're teaching the lesson, you're still using Microsoft Teams and Microsoft Streams and things like that in Schoology, and that was a big push for us, and so we needed to do that because it was always floating out there that this was a possibility. That we would go back. And we were fortunate enough to have 13 some odd weeks of in-person. But now as we went virtual again, I'm just really appreciative that we can say our kids are better off. I know our teachers are on here. We was late to the teacher technology piece. And so right before our school shut down, our teachers got brand new laptops. And so they are excited about that piece because they were using their personal laptops. But again, kudos to our network team who's able to get those. And so now teachers have their laptops. And Tina, I do want you to talk about a piece with tech before I go to Wi-Fi about how you figured out how to convert your phone or iPad into a DICAM or whatever you did there and how that was beneficial.
Well, that was Miss Hogan again. Her and I worked together on that. One of the things our teachers had, the resource they have in their classroom that they probably depend on the most is the document camera. They do that for projecting text, especially in our lower grades where it's a lot of, let's look at this text and I'm going to model that, using it for show call, things like that. But we, one of our instruction partners, ladies, she had figured out how to take your phone and use it as a document camera through Zoom. And then Miss Hogan and I, we kind of worked together to figure out how to do that through Teams, and that was a game changer. And then she found this like gooseneck thing that could hold her phone, so she could have a document camera at home for her scholars to see that. And then we found it very useful as we were coming up on our end of year benchmark for DIBELS. It allowed our teachers to then do their DIBELS assessments because they could project the book for the kids to read. And now, of course, Amplify has made all of their materials digital for us to use, so they don't have to use that anymore. But definitely, and I meant to mention that earlier, that the teachers are able to, a lot of them are using an iPad or a phone as a document camera to show those phonics cards, to show the text, to anything they need their kids to see. So
yeah, it's drastically changed.
Yeah.
Right. It's drastically changed the way we're able to give live instruction because, as she stated, like we can put the story on the screen and share it that way, and teacher can move through it, and you can mark up the text still the same way in the read instruction. So again, like all this was found, right there, a teacher, just trying different things and having other resources to share. The last piece of this before I pass it over to Paramount is, budgeting for tech needs, and those that are in upper management for school knows that the way in which we budget now has changed. In addition to the PPEs and how we're budgeting for that as well, we also have the budget for the tech because as our student population grows, we got to incorporate that. But we also have to make sure that we have a bench of Chromebooks because like any technology, accidents happen and they get dropped or they get spilled or just there's glitches. And you want to make sure that there's no interruption in a student's learning because a Chromebook didn't work. And so that was one of the things that we had to do as well, that we even converted old student laptops and got those reprogrammed to use this as supplements as well. But also give us a special shout out. I don't know if he's watching, he maybe, but I don't know if he's on social media. But our IT guy Jeff, who is a one-man rock star by himself and resetting passwords and coming and fixing Chromebooks, even during the pandemic, came today and yesterday to fix some Chromebooks. And so we're able to bridge that gap. But we know now that we have to budget to make sure that we can keep up with the technology need. And then last but not least, we did purchase some Wi-Fi routers, so parents know that, if you don't have Wi-Fi at home, that we don't want that to be another interruption for your students' learning, to make sure that you have Wi-Fi. So we've done those capabilities. But we've also told parents, hey, connect with another parent during the school day. Again, social distancing and be safe, but maybe do a collaboration. And we're also trying to support our students that go to daycare. If those daycares are not having Wi-Fi, or they have a bunch of kids pulling from the same Wi-Fi, that we can provide those daycare centers with a hotspot for our students where it doesn't pull for everything. And so that's what we're doing with tech. Again, constantly learning. But interested to hear how the team at Paramount has navigated through tech and Wi-Fi and how budgeting will change.
Yeah, thanks, David. This is such a fascinating topic because it's like this giant hole you dive into and it just gets deeper and deeper and you never climb out of it. So I guess most things with technology work that way. But it's really interesting. You mentioned attrition. In purchasing technology for your kids, there's going to be an attrition, especially with devices going home. We were a culture that we weren't sending devices home K-8 at all. Although we were 1-to-1 3rd grade through 8th grade in our system. So we had about 800 to 900 students 1-to-1 pre-pandemic, and then we made the switch mid-pandemic to 1-to-1 K through 8. In that process, I knew we needed at least 10% overage in what we were ordering so we could manage break fix. And so, we have a population now of 1,250 kids. So 10% doesn't sound too much, but suddenly that's 125 extra Chromebooks that we need to not only just go buy, but find. And sometimes that's harder than buying. Pre-pandemic, as this was rolling up and right when the pandemic hit, I should give shout outs, the Charter School Growth Fund, the Calder Foundation. These are some of the national folks that stepped forward and supported us because they had supported us in the past and helped us get into position to buy some more technology early. I think that was definitely a big help to our organization. So very thankful for them. In terms of the rollout itself, our tech wizard, Justin Braun, is amazing. We've got a bevy of software tools that allow us to monitor our technology when it's off site and make sure that it's being used appropriately. If it's not being used at all, we can shut it down. Believe it or not, we had a student try to sell a device on secondary market and didn't go very well because the device was shut down, and we actually had the purchaser of the device call us and ask us to turn the device on, which is how we ended up solving the problem and getting the technology back. And so, having good supports and apps built into those machines were really good. But we were just talking this morning after we had this discussion internally. There's some really interesting problems that are happening that we didn't see in the entire pandemic surrounding staff. We were really trying to predict all our problems with kids, but what do you do when you've got a staff member at home with poor Wi-Fi? We're always thinking about how to support the child with poor Wi-Fi, but if the teacher has poor Wi-Fi and they can't deliver a good lesson, suddenly we're in a limiting experience. And I was just thinking about it minutes ago. I was like, we've got to start hardwiring our teachers, and we've got to have them plug directly into their Wi-Fi routers at home. So it's going to solve 90% of our speed issues by plugging in direct. So quick secondary thought there. In terms of Wi-Fi cards, the numbers that we're running are anywhere between $250 and $600 a year for hotspots for Wi-Fi per card. And so when you're talking about budgeting those in, realistically, we're seeing numbers between 10 and 20% of our families in a Wi-Fi need position. Some of them absolutely have to have our help. Others are just getting things put in process or maybe dealing with some instability that's making it hard for them to be consistent. So that's another strong budget consideration. And then the type of technology being used, obviously we were an Apple school before all of this started. And when we went 1-to-1 in technology, you can't make a good fiscal decision going 1-to-1 with Apple technology unless you're being floated money by Bezos or somebody. And so we had to switch over and go with a cheaper 1-to-1 device, and Chromebooks really make a lot of sense there. And so we switched our staff to Chromebooks as well, so they were teaching with the same technology that their students were learning on. We felt like that gave a really good synergy between teacher and student. But we ran into problems there because the Chromebooks can only handle so much throughput in terms of video and handling multiple screens and everything else. So for us, that was eye-opening. And you just mentioned your staff got new computers. We couldn't get all of our staff new computers, but they certainly got computers that weren't Chromebooks. And so we had a lot of upcycling going on to support our teachers who were in the virtual space to make sure that they had the bandwidth to support the students on the other side. For some of the rest of that, I want to hand it over to Jess to talk about how we worked some of these problems. I've mentioned a few of them, but on the operations side, she's really fronted most of this for us.
Yeah, a couple other issues that we tried to do some break fix work really quick. Making sure that students are searching appropriate content was one of them. So we have a web filter called Securely that has something called Auditor, and it scans for alerts based on context. So it's not just searching for keywords, but keywords in context. And then that alert gets sent to our social emotional team. So a counselor reaches out to students who are typing in things about bullying or self-harm or, not age appropriate content for that time, and then works with the family in that as well. And so instead of just turning off a device for inappropriate use, we're trying to get them the social emotional supports that are necessary, for why someone would be typing that in.
Just real quick, sorry. Is that you can do that remotely? Like you guys can from the student's home? Oh wow. What's that called again? Yep. Calvin, write this one down. write this down.
It's the web filter is called Securely, and then there's a part of it called Auditor, and I think it runs about
it's well worth it though, like you said, yeah.
But totally worth it. Yeah, I mean, and that's one of the disconnects is, how do you provide social emotional support to students who aren't self-identifying? Sometimes they self-identify by just the things that they type into a search bar. And it scans everything. So anything that goes through their email, their drive, their docs, anything, which has been really helpful for us. And the fact that we can direct it to a certain staff member so that we know how it's going to get dealt with is also really useful. A couple other things, not all teachers want their personal cell phones given out to families and students. So using Google Voice or school-sponsored cell phone plans to make sure that they can still communicate in a way that they're comfortable with is something we've used. Annotation tools. Kyle found a really cool pad that allows teachers and kids to see what's being annotated. So instead of them just typing in an answer, they can actually see that math work being done, kind of like what Tina was talking about earlier. Dot cams are another thing we've had to, think about having for everybody at home. And then another thing is just, standard operating procedures for, what should you do when you're conducting videos or having live lessons? Lighting is a big thing. We don't want our teachers to look like they're in witness protection. And so there's just a lot of tricks if you're not on, a screen all the time to help you realize like where the light needs to be and where your face needs to be and the kind of candor you need to have when you're just talking at a screen and not communicating back and forth with a person is a little bit different. So we have that in place. And then engagement trackers. So what you mentioned earlier, we know that not all of our kids can join those live lessons, but we want to make sure that they engage with a video recording of it at some point. And so Kyle's worked really hard to get our schools hooked up with different engagement trackers that can show which kids have watched the video. And then it also documents, like, did they watch the whole video? Did they only watch the first 2 seconds of it and then close it down? So just, things like that you would be able to do in a one-to-one kind of classroom, but it makes it a little bit more difficult otherwise. As far as budgeting for all of this, like Tommy talked about, we were really fortunate to have some awesome donors on our end. And then also our team just hustled with grants and, really try to think of it like we're going to be in this for the unforeseen future. And so we know these are costs that we're going to have. And so when we were planning for our grants, where can we fit in tech? Where can we fit this in? And just budgeting really conservatively to allow for gaps that we could fill later on with.
And we should point out, Jess, sorry to cut you off. I mean, shout out to OEI for fronting the Gear Grant and Perry Township for being the fiscal agent for local technology via COVID dollars coming into the state. So that was also a big help for us in terms of laptops and hotspots. And a shout out to 5-Star Technologies who helped support us on the back end because our tech guy, Justin, is amazing. He's one person. And then Matt Belsass and Trajectory. We've been using Trajectory since the start of the school year to manage more of the break fix, along with our call center based approach for tech service. So that tech support in home for families is, some weeks it can be a 20, 30-hour task. Other weeks it can be 4 hours, but we really felt we needed that extra surplus there. So we actually have 2 different tech companies supporting our tech department at the school.
So I think, and just to kind of teed it up, so I think now that we talked about Wi-Fi and technology, now we're going to talk about engagement. I think this is another area that I know we are still learning. And so for us, this is going to be a lot of us listening as well. But we'll have Paramount kicking off about teacher engagement strategies, but also with that, strategies for non-engagement. So how do you engage the students, and then how do we support when there's non-engagement? So I'll kick it off to the team at Paramount. I think it's Kyle and Darius will lead us in engagement.
Yeah, I'll just kind of give a big picture summary of what we're doing with engagement and then how we're supporting those non-engaged students. And Darius, working on the front lines of that every day, can kind of talk through how he's leveraging his team to support with that process. We developed some engagement trackers that we really use to codify how we define and track student engagement across our network of schools. We use those to put in key high-level assignments on that tracker, but also track every engagement we have with that child. And we also have an additional tracker for our special education students and our English language learners, so we can provide those additional supports, but also document those additional supports. With that, we have some really talented tech folks on our site teams who are able to develop a formulated spreadsheet that allows us to not only track those things across our network, but formulate a weekly engagement tracker that can go home to families. So happy to walk through that document, David. I think that's our last PDF. If you could please pull that up, and I can just kind of annotate through it quickly, and then I'll pass it on to Darius.
Yep. Is that the assignment tracker?
Yeah, that's it. Yep.
Perfect. Okay.
So it's hard to tell here, but this is all based on a formula. So each of our grade levels puts together their highest level reading, writing, math, science assignments per week. So this is just the assignment part of things. And then they, as a grade level, during their weekly strategic planning sessions, I mentioned before that our network grade level teams are meeting once a week to codify this process and align their academic programming. They plug in the numbers, and that helps us populate the total engagement, but it also helps us get to get a better idea of how students are performing within those grade level standards, because we choose the highest level standard focused assignments every week to put on there. So it's a very cool document. It's one we use across our entire district to make sure that we are fully tracking engagement and participation within those high-level assignments as well. If you scroll down just a little bit, this is color-coded now. So if a student, I forgot what exactly the numbers that we decided on were, but if a student has 80% or higher, they're in the green. If you start getting into the red, and there's a lot of reds here because there's zeros, because it's just a sample document. But if you're starting to get into the reds, then we leverage our site level support teams for a little bit of additional remediation with that child to make sure that we're reaching out to them and engaging them and really supporting them in anything they need to make sure they're engaged and they have what they need to be supported through this process. One more slide down, please. Again, this is our contact sheet. So this is the way we'll log the weekly contacts with our families. So we're going on every week. We try to make 2 phone calls beyond the welcome calls per week, Monday and Thursday, so that parents are getting that meaningful communication twice a week. And then we finish the week with the engagement tracker that goes home to all families. Down one more, please. Similar concept, but this is for our special education population. Each teacher of record makes an additional call daily to the students on their caseload and provides accommodations as needed. One thing we did mention is our special education teachers are also integrated within their Google Classroom of each teacher, so they can provide that on-demand support as needed. But as we provide that additional small group and one-on-one support per the student's IEP, we can document all of that there as well. And then the last slide is our engagement. Is that the last one? Oh, it may not be on there. I'm going to pass it on to Darius to talk a little bit about how we're leveraging our staff to support those non-engaged students, and also talk a little bit about our engagement tracker that goes home on Fridays to our families.
Yeah, definitely. And, you know, I'll start with the engagement piece and like what does engagement look like from the teacher's perspective at Paramount, and then we'll get into the non-engagement piece. You know, just like everybody else, you know, we're trying to just be grounded in the simplicity of what our tools are and just use the tools that we have to the best of our ability. So I think about it as like a gradual release process. So first and foremost, we just have to feel good about Google Classroom. I think for us, Google Classroom is just a non-starter in terms of, you know, that is ground zero. And luckily, you know, if we're talking about it like phase 1, 2, and 3 of virtual, during phase 1, we got lucky that we were already using Google Classroom really kind of across the district, but using Google Classroom at a very high clip. So when we got thrust into virtual in the spring, you know, honestly, we got lucky that kids knew Google Classroom very well. And, you know, it was kind of like business as usual. We're just at home. So, and now even fast forward to us being in phase 3 right now of virtual learning, you know, and luckily we had some time this time to make sure that kids were ready for virtual instruction. So I thought it was real cool. And I think it mattered a lot because we were even getting a few new kids right up until the last minute. But a lot of our teachers right before we officially switched over to virtual right now, they literally led out the last week of instruction as though they were in a virtual classroom. So teachers had already taken time and pre-recorded lessons and were really directing students day in and day out in their classes as though they were home doing that math instruction from home. And they had to watch the live lesson, click on the links and let that transfer it to Savvis, let it transfer it to StudySync, etc. So it was kind of cool to watch that send off right before virtual instruction. It was just happening in the building. So, and I think again, that send off is making sure kids and teachers feel good about just navigating Google Classroom. You know, what's the difference between the stream tab at the top versus the classwork tab at the top? You know, so and then that teacher directing the students like, hey, I'm doing a lot of communication via the stream, so you need to start here. Or I'm doing, you know, I'm not putting that much on the stream. You just got to go to the classwork and it's already nicely organized. So the teachers did a good job of right before directing kids about how to best navigate Google Classroom for their individual class. But once we feel good about Google Classroom and the navigation of it from the teacher's perspective, the teachers did a great job of at that point. Our universal tool right now for videos is Screencastify. So once you can navigate and do a lot of good things for Google Classroom, now you got to go make these pre-recorded videos. So we're using the platform of Screencastify to make those videos. And you know, that they've been real cool. Like we're telling teachers, I want to still see that same, you know, 8 to 10 minute mini lesson that I will see that if I walk into your classroom physically. So teachers are recording themselves, walking themselves through typically a PowerPoint, but walking through their mini lesson as though they're in the classroom, still building in that gradual release of a guided practice where, you know, we're doing a problem together and as I send you into independent work. And the way that we do that check for understanding piece is getting into our next tool. So again, first, Google Classroom, feel good about that. Second, let's record your video, that's Screencastify. But how we get into that guided practice, into the independent work, is using some tools that honestly we've already talked about. So teachers are starting to incorporate tools like Nearpod and incorporate tools like Edpuzzle that allows them to build in check for understandings into the video. So what they do is they make their Screencastify video, then they put that video into the Edpuzzle platform, for example, and Edpuzzle allows them to like stop the video at a certain second of the video and essentially build in a check for understanding question for the student. And the great thing about Edpuzzle, I think is highly underrated, and everybody should be using it. Is it allows the teacher to one building that check for understanding, but it doesn't let the kid continue on with the video until they submit an answer. So even if they get it, hopefully they're getting it right, but even if they get it right or wrong, the video cannot continue until you submit an answer for that question, which is awesome. And then on the back end, and Jess mentioned this for a second earlier, the teacher can look under Edpuzzle and just see how much of that video did that kid watch. Did they watch 100% of the video? If it's a 10-minute video, did they stop at the 4-minute mark, at the 7-minute mark? You can see it down to the second as to how much of the video did the kid engage with. And that's very powerful. One, for just accountability and a good way for kids. Like, hey, I'm glad you're at my office hours right now. Like, you're awesome for that. But I see you only watch 4 minutes of my video. So let's start there. So, just it helps us guide conversations with kids and students just to make sure that they are upholding their end of the bargain and engaging with the tools at their disposal. And that's been huge for us. We also use Nearpod, similar to how Tina talked about it in the platform. Again, Nearpod is a huge tool for us. And going off of what Kyle said, we use every Friday, we are building our weekly reports for parents and students. So we want to make sure that we're communicating well with parents as to how their kid is doing virtually. So we're building out based on the tracker that you had showed, we're putting in a 1 that the kid did the assignment or a 0 that the kid did not do the assignment. Just building in some trackers so we can send home a report for parents like, hey, awesome job for your kid this week. And it's color coded. So, parents can instantly see the amount of green or yellow or orange or red on the report, even before they read the wording of it. And that report is basically just letting you know, like, your kid did an awesome job this week, knocked it out of the park in terms of engaging and completing the work. Or, we're listing out the amount of the assignments that they missed. Like, hey, in math, they missed these 2 assignments this week. In ELA, they missed these 3 assignments this week. So it does a good job of starting conversation with parents. And if needed, that kid is over the weekend trying to tackle and catch up on some of that missing work before we hit a fresh slate of work on that following Monday. So that weekly report is so powerful because, again, it's just a great conversation starter between the school and between parents. So those are a lot of the tools that we use for teacher engagement that have been just invaluable to us at Paramount. But what we do in terms of like non-engagement, so let's say we're starting to get students who are just not engaged in the platform. What's great is similar to what you talked about, David, we're looking at students and thinking about looking at teachers and staff and thinking how can we start to move people's roles around based on, where we are currently in the situation. So right now, for example, we have a recovery team and a family outreach team, and their roles look a lot different because there are not kids in the building right now. So what we're doing is we're looking at that assignment tracker, and if a kid is in the red, even after 2 days, so 2 days go by, that kid is trending towards red, the discipline team or the recovery team and the FACT team are instantly making calls out to that family, if not even knocking on their door, just to check in and see and just say, hey, what's going on? And sometimes it might be a Wi-Fi issue that they didn't communicate. Other times it might be just I truly don't I need help. And maybe they didn't get the memo about the office hours, et cetera. So we're looking at that assignment tracker to triage situations that they didn't outwardly come out and tell us. So that non-engagement piece is just huge for us to, again, get kids back on the right track, and using our discipline team and using our FACT family outreach team to, again, just get kids back in the fold and get them access to a high quality education.
Yeah, it's we're developing a virtual school that's opening next year, and we've had to tackle some of these problems on a very long-term basis as we design the outflow for that new school. And so this has been an amazing test run for us, and quite honestly, we wouldn't be developing a virtual school if there hadn't been a pandemic. But it's made us think long and hard about strategies for non-engagement. And so what we've come up with as the longer-term solution is a really overused word. It's called mentoring. But any child who starts to slip, fall behind, or is not showing the engagement needed does get assigned a mentor who will be a member of one of the staff in that school And that member of the staff is then charged with following up with that student. Because the number of non-engagement is going to be high, especially in a pandemic where we've got a percentage of families who didn't ask for this, it was just thrown at them and they're now having to deal with it. We have higher levels of non-engagement now than what we would have in any purely regular chosen virtual environment. So it's a tall task to engage with all of these families who are really struggling and all these students who maybe don't have the capacity or support to engage. So we have to share the load, but it needs to be systematic. There needs to be a program for it. And for us, it was calling it mentoring and dedicating mentors for each child who is going through this problem. And even if we have to ramp up caseload similar to what we would do in special education or ELL, it's going to be a strong component of who we are. And like Darius said, you know, all of the non-teaching staff need a job, and you know, they're being paid to work a year-round job in our organization, and we're going to put them to work in the most essential task of all, which is student engagement. So they're going to be in that game. Special education is really challenging also. We're dealing with very similar issues in students who might have trouble accessing technologies, students' families who have trouble getting their students to stay focused through that technology because of their disability. Our special education team works tirelessly at engaging these families in every means possible. And I think it's a really interesting thing to think that there can still be a pull-in, push-out model, or sorry, push and pull-out model in special education in a virtual environment. And to have our special education team pushing in to virtual lessons and still co-planning with the classroom teachers for accommodations and modifications, and then having that tenacious follow-up with students when it's just not working out, so we can come up with plan B, plan C, plan D, you know, recasing that child to make sure that, you know, we're adjusting accommodations as necessary. Those are real key factors in making sure that we get it right and get through that process. And I know this kind of leads into attendance, which I will get to in a second, and I want to hear Tindley's response to engagement, but I did want to mention ghost students. It's a really tough topic, but in this era, we do have a lot of lost families who, when we switch to pure virtual, we think we have them on our roster, and we find out after a couple of weeks of trying. We're knocking on doors, we're sending, you know, people to the house, we're making every phone call, email, sending certified letters, trying to find these families, and they're just not there. And we have to make the courageous decision when that happens to drop them from our rosters, because if we keep those families on and wait for count day, we've done a really interesting ethical thing. And I think that's a tension point that virtual schools get hit really hard on all the time for carrying a caseload of kids just for the financial reason for it, when they might not even truly be on the roster. And since we're forced into this virtual environment this year, we certainly don't want to get the same kind of stone throwing that comes with that. And so non-engagement can lead to those hard decisions, and hopefully it doesn't, because you've got families that just need more support. We need to find a way to support them. But the inverse in making sure that we make sound decisions is also true. But that's kind of a downer, but let's take it back to you guys and let's hear what you're doing on your end.
Yeah. Calvin, you want to go ahead? I mean, I took notes most of the time during this.
You know what? So did I. I really enjoyed that, because I think this is probably one of our biggest growth areas. As I said before, what we recognized in the spring was teachers were really struggling with getting kids to engage the way they would in the classroom. And so we did Nearpod and things like that. But one thing that we tried to do as a going to kind of talk towards your tracker, one of the things that Mr. McGuire implemented, and he even implemented it in the spring, was the teachers do a week at a glance. So that goes out to the families at the beginning of the week so that they know, the parents and the kids know in a friendly way, not in teacher technical terms, what they can expect their kids to be learning each day. So that's something that we've implemented as part of our communication of what needs to be happening. And so parents know what's going on. So we have that goes out. I feel like the teachers are finding more and more ways to get kids engaged in the learning through some of our platforms. I think one of the areas we struggle with is that non-engagement. Like, streams doesn't really allow us to see who watched the videos, and that's been a constant conversation with our teachers. How do I know if the kid watched the video? Because we take attendance based off of who's there live, and Schoology has allowed us in grades 2 through 6, if they complete the assignment, then we'll mark them present. So I think we're still navigating the waters of really getting everybody engaged, but the streams has been an issue for non-engagement, but we have a great team that is reaching out. When they get that attendance report, they're making phone call after phone call. The parents are not liking it, but they will call every single day. Your child's not in class. Your child needs to be in class. Our dean today said he told a parent, "You're going to hear from me every single day. So you just need to get them. You just need to get them on." So our counselor, our dean, instructional assistant, our office manager, our specials teachers, they're taking those lists and they're calling. We're doing everything to try to get those kids. And as Mr. McGuire said, we really try to stay in communication with the families, the ones who don't have that Wi-Fi. We're supporting them and we're trying to make sure that everybody has what they need to be successful. We do try to keep track of the parents who say, "My kid can't be there live. They're gonna watch the video and they're gonna do this later." But again, the nice thing about Schoology is we can see that those assignments are done. Schoology ties into PowerSchool, which is our grading system. So because we went forward with our curriculum, the teachers are continuing to submit grades the way they did when they were in class. Parents all have logins for PowerSchool. We communicate out weekly, log in, check your child's grades, but teachers reach out every 2 weeks for failing grades, just in case the parent hasn't been checking in. I feel like I'm missing something. Why am I missing something?
No, I think you.
I was going to talk about our SPED and ELL. You were talking about the SPED and ELL. Before we even left, they had given their students their scholars schedules for when they would be having their own pull-out services, but they are also pushing in to those live classes, like you said. So they're seeing what's happening in the class, so then they're able to support in their individual schedules as well, and working very, very hard to make sure that the scholars are getting those supports.
And that was our puzzle, trying to make sure that our ELL and our SPED scholars, because our school, we have 38 SPED scholars, 36 ELL scholars, and so those teachers, it's 3 of them for those group of students, and trying to navigate to make sure we can still stay aligned to their IEP, to make sure they still get the services that they deserve, has been a big thing. So I know I had a touch with our ELL teacher today, and she had 17 different mini meetings going on today because she was pulling her groups, and this was her busy day. So she used Monday as her busy day to do her small group, and they're some are one-on-ones and some are 2-on-1s and 3-on-1s, and so that's been the big thing for us as well. But I think for me, if there's one piece of this that I'm going to watch over and over, it is this engagement piece, because as Talon said, this is our biggest growth area, and so we thank you guys for sharing that. So want to just shout out again the folks that have been rocking with us. We have a few more we're going to go through, but it's very robust, and so we'll talk about attendance, which again, not the sexiest thing to talk about, but you all know those that oversee us, they don't want to see attendance drop to 60%. And so it has to be a primary focus. And so jokingly, but seriously, we have a saying in our school, everybody's got to work. And Tommy, you hit on it. Folks are being paid salaries. And so part of that is you're now on attendance. And while it seems like, oh, that's easy, you talk to our counselor and our dean, they will be on the phone from 8 until 3, calling, trying to get kids logged on, finding where they are. To what you said, we've had to make some house visits. We did that in iteration 1 and 2. We haven't done it yet, but I know it's coming, knocking on doors. And so what we do is it's simple. So when teachers, when kids come on, and again, just to be transparent, we're very strict about our attendance. And so in some places, kids have to log on essentially 2 to 3 times a day. Now, you can't come to school in the morning and not show up in the afternoon and be counted present if you did not communicate prior of a doctor's appointment or anything like that. And so it's the same thing we would do in the school day, or you can't show up in the afternoon class and miss the whole morning unexcused. And so as tough as it sounds, like if it's unexcused absence, if they miss one of the three, then they are absent for that day. And so again, because we have to draw a line and we have to push that this is serious, that this is not a time where we can just relax. Now, if the parent says, reach out and say, hey, kid has a doctor's appointment at 9:30, they'll watch the video, do the assignment, and they'll be in the afternoon, then that's marked as excused. And so they get excused. And then when they show up in the second or third session, it's changed the present. And so it's a constant communication. Our counselor's done a great job. She's overseeing attendance, but she's working with the PE teacher and the art teacher and the instructional assistant and the dean, and they're split up and they're calling. So a teacher will submit their attendance and say, I have these 4 kids missing, and then they'll make a call. And so sharing a story today. So our 5th grade teacher yesterday in her morning class, she only had 12 of her 23 kids show up. Our dean called because he was assigned there. Today she had 19 of 23, right? So just a simple call, the reminder to the parents, and telling the parents, hey, you thought your child would show up on their own and they didn't. So then the parent says, oh, well, I'm going to make sure they show up. And now kids are showing up. And so we take attendance very serious. Tina knows it is the one thing that I am harping on, because again, just like if kids don't come to school, kids can't learn. So if kids aren't logging on, how are kids going to learn? And so we given the Chromebooks, we've done the Wi-Fi boxes, something we haven't talked about. Our city's done a good job with these learning sites. And so we're pushing parents there if need be. If you're saying, hey, I got to work, I don't trust them being at home. Hey, we have a church, one of the churches, the Recess Center is 3 minutes from our school. And they have a learning site. They're taking 40 kids. If you go a little further the other way, New Direction Church, about 15 minutes, it's taking another 40 kids. So within a 20-minute radius, you have an option of 2 different locations to send your students. And so we're pushing them there because we need students logged on. And so attendance is the thing that I think that keeps me up at night. I do not want to see our attendance rate drop. I want to see kids on learning, and I want to make sure that those people are working. And so we strategize in our leadership team meeting about how we can improve attendance. I'm not the biggest fan on incentives, but I'll do it if I have to, whether it's Summit Bucks virtually or gift cards for parents. But I think our parents know, and our parents know, the best way your students are going to learn if they're in school. And I think that's the biggest incentive, their kids getting a quality education. And so our big thing is we deploy staff, and it's all hands on deck with attendance. And that includes myself and Tina and Kyle and everybody else to make sure if we need to make calls as well. So curious to hear how you guys are approaching attendance as well and what that policy is like at Paramount.
Yeah, just some quick commentary on attendance. I think that we're going to see in Indiana this year, which is probably more unfortunate than fortunate, is we'll see a large population, maybe 50, 60% of our schools, right around 100% attendance for the year. Because you simply can do that if you're not paying attention and you're just taking it for granted. And that's maybe saying, a negative cast against the state of Indiana, but I think it's very tempting to mark everybody present when you've got virtual learning going on. And I just hope that that's not happening. I know it's going to, but we get measured on attendance, by our authorizer, by the state. There's metrics there that we should pay attention to. And like you said, David, it's not a flippant thing. Attendance is the future of that child. Their ability to learn and grow is dependent on them getting an education. And so, you can't put a high enough priority on it. But I'll pass it up to Jess for how we track some of this and what we do on it.
Yeah, so for our Indiana folks, I think one of the challenges at the very beginning of the school year was trying to navigate all of the different attendance codes that changed on us at the beginning of the year and knowing when to use which code and when to choose, So, right now, making sure that we're using the V-COVID and that all the teachers know what that means. And then, when we do get to go back, what do we switch back to? And when, kids get sent home, what do we switch to? And so just making sure everybody's, communicated what that plan looks like has been a big priority on the operations front for us. And then also just making sure that we have an attendance policy that reflects our culture and our values, kind of what you and Tommy just spoke about. So, when do teachers take attendance? What platform? Is it the same one as on campus? Is it the same way as if they were on campus? And then, really the big one, the big ethical question is what counts as present, and defining that for your school and making sure everyone in the school community, families, kids, they all know that. If you're saying that your student needs to log in and watch a video before noon every day. Parents need to know that. They need to know if they can't do that, where to call, who to call, to make sure that they don't miss anything and that they are being counted if they're doing the work at a different time. You know, and then also some of the other things we've been strategizing around, like what measures are in place to reduce the number of excessive absentee cases. I'm going to ask Darius to talk about that in just a second. But then also, how do you uphold existing failure to ensure and truancy policies? Because a lot of that gets done on campus through our discipline and our mentoring and our counseling programs. So how do you do that if you can't reach kids? And so really just brainstorming around, you know, making sure that we're holding people accountable, but we're supporting them in that process. So Darius, I'd love you to talk about what the school does to make sure that kids are actually in the building, or not in the building, on the platform.
Engage, yeah. You know, well, first, I think is, you know, and one quick way we take attendance, and again, I think Jess hit the nail right on the head, is just defining it at the local level, because you will have some people, which I think is awesome, David, that you're doing at Tindley, like that has like the highest bar that I've heard when it comes to virtual attendance. And you have other schools who are, you know, just marking 100% because they can, like Tommy said. So again, just defining it for your school and rolling with it. One thing that we do is just, you know, just trying to initially get that engagement for their kid on the top of the morning. And that typically looks like a survey. So we might have some classrooms who are asking almost like a question of the day. And that question of the day is just on the Google Classroom. And it's kind of like a morning bell ringer. It might, from what is your favorite color? How are you feeling today? So it could be a simple answer. It could be an open-ended question, or them just like going in and just filling out their name. And that's just the quickest way to just mark the engagement of that kid, to mark them present. But then after that, you know, there's a lot of kids. We're hoping that the majority, if not 100% of kids, engage that way for their attendance. Post that, there are kids who just don't do that or forget that is an option for them. So then we're going instantly to that engagement tracker to see what kids did work. Because obviously, once you do work, then we can, you know, count you as engaged and count you present. So we go instantly to those assignment trackers to see who is scoring ones on that assignment tracker to mark them present and mark them as engaged, which is awesome. And a lot of times, in a good way, it's affirming that the kids who are answering the question of the day are the same students who are engaging and getting ones on their assignments, so we can mark them present. So it's just another layer, if you will, between the question of the day to start the day, almost like a bell ringer, and then moving on to the actual assignments to just double down on the attendance tracking and the data piece of it all. But again, like we talked about earlier, for those students who are just not engaged, we're looking at those trackers and seeing students who did not engage that day. So we're taking that data and doing those same reminder calls. Like, you know, right now we kind of have a split up on our discipline team that, you know, between the dean of students and the guidance counselor, the two members of our family outreach team. We're a 4-grade school, so they each kind of have a grade, and they're seeing like who was not marked present that day, and they're making those initial calls, just saying like, hey, your student did not engage in any kind of way today, and you know, what do you need from us to fix that moving into tomorrow? So I think one thing I always tell the team is you just can't get bored with systems. You can't get bored with success. So you just have to, you know, have your system and just execute it every single day, and just continue to execute it to the point where it becomes second nature.
Yeah, I think, and Tommy, you said it. I do feel like schools are going to go the 100% route, but we all know what two things correlate: attendance and academic performance. So you can say you had 100% attendance, but if the data, the academic data, doesn't match, there's going to be some questions asked, right? Either the question is, what type of teaching was happening, or were these kids really present, right? And so for us, we just didn't want to get in that ballpark. We wanted to be completely transparent. And luckily, again, going back to our earlier conversation, I communicated the attendance policy with our parents and asked, were there any questions or concerns? And they all said no, because I know if my kid didn't come to school and I didn't tell you, you would call me then. So I expect it now. And so again, it was transparent up front, and they're good with it. And they know, I mean, they also know too, right? That they this, we know it's a hard time, but they understand why we're doing it and the why behind it. We're not doing it just to be sticklers. We're doing it because we care about your student. And so, so folks, we're getting close to the 2-hour point, but we have 3 more sections, and we're going to combine the next 2 and talk about them. And then we're going to get to Q&A. We're going to kind of do some closing thoughts because we want to make sure we share some contact information. And then Tommy has some awesome resources that we want to make sure we share out. Just so I want to name, when this is over, I'm going to create a link that will be on the Tindley Summit podcast, but it'll be titled Thriving During Virtual Learning. I'm going to share the link with the Paramount folks. You'll see it on social media. You can listen to it just like a podcast, and then we'll let you know how you can get those resources and where our schedules are. They're on our website, which we'll also share. And you see Paramount is there at the bottom, and then we'll share ours. But our next 2, we're going to talk about school operations during virtual learning, and then staffing. So with school operations, how we're navigating relationships with our vendors and what that looks like, and then the future use for PPEs, and then how we're handling staff, absences, and PTO and sick days. And so we're going to kick it off with the Paramount team to lead that conversation first, and then we'll do it, and then we'll close out with Q&A.
Yeah, Jess is the queen of operations, and is really pretty impressive in this department. So happy to have her take off with us.
So there have been a lot of different things that we talked about that are going to cost schools a ton of money. And so operations when schools close is actually one of the ways you can save a ton of money. And so some of the ways that we're being fiscally responsible right now, since we can't have students in buildings, making sure that there's a procedure in place for shutting down a physical building. So everyone knows before you leave your classroom, do these things, turn off your lights, turn off your TVs, make sure your appliances are unplugged. Have your ops manager or someone at your school turn your HVAC settings down to the lowest possible for the season, so that's not running when people aren't in there. Another one doesn't necessarily save money, but it's going to save you a headache when you get back, is making sure there's no food in any of the refrigerators or your classrooms or anywhere, because you're going to come back to big surprises that you don't want. Also remembering to send medications home with students and having families sign off that they did pick those medications up is a big one for us. We also limit how much custodial services we do in our buildings. We always have at least one person a day in buildings just to keep everything refreshed, keep tabs on everything, make sure when we do come back in person that it's going to look just as clean as it was when we left, if not more so. And then another big one is having a process for how you're going to handle mail and cash when you don't have the physical building open, because if your policies that are in place aren't followed even during a school closure, that'll result in an audit comment. And so how are you handling that? Is somebody going through and picking up the mail? How are you doing deposits? Just all of that is something to think about. Vendor relationships. If you have on-site vendors like before and after care or food service, just having conversations with the rep from those companies on what role they'll play during the closure. At our Brookside campus, we're working with the YMCA to be a learning site for students that can come there. And then also we do meal packs every Monday for our families through Aramark. And so we still have those people on site, but it just looks like different than it would if we had kids there. And then also suspending or limiting any unnecessary services. So we're not going to need trash pickup as many times a week as we would if we were on campus. So suspending that, cleaning services, mat services, automated supply orders, anything you're not using when people aren't there, just call your vendor and put it on hold. And they do it all the time. So you're going to save money there. A couple other things, food service and reporting. I don't know. So Indiana folks, again, sorry, this is kind of specific, but you can apply to be an open feeding site just like you could over the summer. So that would mean you could give meal packs to anyone 18 and under, whether they go to your school or not. You just, you go through your S&P rep for that part of it if you need help. And then also if you're handing out meal packs, we do 5 breakfasts and lunch every Monday from 9 to 10. We take orders from families. We did a big call drive to make sure everybody knew that that was an option and they can pick it up and they can, ask for it on a weekly basis. It wasn't a one and done, it's a revolving number. Who's going to be on site from your team to oversee and record everything and to make sure everything with DOE is happening the way that it needs to. And then as school leaders, what are we doing to ensure that, all of our Department of Education reports, all of our authorizer reports, all of those, really boring things that we have to do to stay open, how, who's doing all of that? How's it all getting done? How are you checking that it's all getting done? So having procedures in place for that. Some of the other things just to think about, like Tommy said, we always like to operate that this is just how we're going to live our lives from now on until we don't, and then we'll go from there. But that brings us to a lot of future need for PPE, and then how do you plan for that? And so really, we've scaled out what supplies we would need through the end of the year, and we're anticipating shortages and really long wait times. We're seeing toilet paper and paper towels not on shelves in grocery stores anymore. That's what it's going to be like with hand sanitizer and masks for schools. And so how do you ensure you have what you need before it's an emergency? Another thing that we did was we upgraded our HVAC systems to MERV 13 filters or higher. The cost was pretty minimal. It was about $70 a unit, but that's one of the things we did to make sure we're trying to keep the air clean and people safer.
Yeah, and doubling this into the staffing thing, just a quick thought beyond operations into staffing is we're dealing with some fun issues in absences in virtual instruction. And not many of us have policies for this because you're already home and yet you're going to take a day off. And we have to remember that these are employees who can take PTO. But if they're not going to take PTO, they need to be on. And there needs to be an expectation for how on really is. And so, what are we telling staff that they're held accountable to if they're in a regular work day working from home versus a PTO day? And if they're unable to meet those expectations, the expectation should then be, all right, you're going to take a PTO day. But I think that gets very gray in this situation. And it's something just to tuck in the back of your mind to make sure that you've got a policy for sick days in this new environment. And there's so much great leeway for being sick with COVID in this environment where your HR team should be able to take great care of your people. But there just needs to be a good policy in place for all of that. Tindley?
Yeah, and so Jess, I'll talk about the operations. Jess, you hit on a lot of things as well. So I think the funny thing is I went to the school today, and so what we did was we took our leadership team and basically everyone was assigned a day. So our actual building is open from 8 to 12, Monday through Friday. So that means there's somebody there. And so Tina has Monday, I had today, our dean has tomorrow, AP has, our accounts has Thursday, and then our AP has Friday. And so there'll be somebody in our building. And so it's one person. And so for that things like the mail and where our office manager who's not in the building, she has the phone routed to her to where she's at. And so we don't have to answer the phone. Tina knows, thank goodness, because it rings off the hook. But we can check the mail and check classroom. But Tina knows before we left, I didn't let teachers walk out the building until I checked their classroom. It was kind of like the end of the school year. So they put their desk, the chairs on top of their desk. We cleaned out scholar towers and seat sacks. To just to your point, we're in an old IPS building. And 4 years ago when we moved in, we had some little friends that spent the school year with us, and we do not want to do that again. So we cleared out the vending machines and refrigerators and things like that. And I don't know about you, I went in the building today and I was cold. And it made sense why I was cold in the building because, things aren't on. And so we went through that process to make sure we closed the building as though we were finishing the school year. And so the teachers was like, why are we doing this? And I said, well, we're not going to be here for 5 weeks. And so your smart board has to be turned off. Your computer has to be turned off. Turn your light off. Even the light over your scholar tower. We have random lights over that's one switch and that needs to be turned off. And the bathroom lights are turned off. And because we just want to have the extra cost, to your point, because we know that we're going to need some of this money to purchase more PPEs. And so we're also doing meals. And so what parents can do is they can fill out a spreadsheet. It goes live on Fridays at 5 p.m. and it closes Sunday at 9 p.m. And so they can fill it out and then they can pick up meals Monday and Tuesday between 9 and 12 at our school. And so it gives them 5 breakfasts and 5 lunch that they can pick up. And so we went this route to just offer meals to our current families. But, in the summer and last year, we did open it up to the community. But this year, we're just opening it up to our families. And so we've had families take advantage of that. And so that allows for our lunch crew to still be a part of that. Our cleaning staff citywide did a great job during the school year. So we did have 2 day porters, Miss Alma and Miss Brenda, who kept our schools safe and clean. And it's part of the reason why I believe we were able to keep everybody safe because they were constantly disinfecting things. And so During this time, you know, they come in probably to just empty the trash once or twice a week because there's not many folks in there. And then there's a night porter that probably just comes to double check the building to make sure things are clean because, you know, when we do hopefully open up, we want to make sure that the school is open ready. And all we have to do is take desks off the chairs or off the tables and put together CSACs. Again, with the future use for PPEs, we try to budget out for beginning of the school year, but we also had to try to be resourceful during this time like we would do in our home. And so we taught our students, you know, if you use the hand sanitizer, you know, it's one squirt. You don't need 6 of them, you know, 1 squirt so we can save them. The mask, we trying to get reusable masks and talk to our families about, hey, you know, wash the mask, you know, each day. You can hand wash, you put it in the dryer, but if you can get your student a mask per day, then they can switch it out. Then on the weekend, you can wash them and have those again. But we also have those at the school that we use. We try not to use them. We hope kids come with them. And, you know, some days are better than others. I think Monday's the worst day for kids having masks because it's after the weekend. And then as the week goes on, it got better. So while we do have a stash of masks available, we, as you know, like that can go through that very quickly. And so we want to make sure we stay on top of that. But our big thing now is keeping the building clean and making sure that when we do open that the building is ready. But to your point, we made sure we cleared out all our deposits in our safe to make sure we balance those and got that squared away. And the big thing now is making sure we get the mail because there is a lot of timely things being sent back because we did have to mail some things out because we had some kids that didn't come to school on the last couple of days. And so they missed the pickup. So we had to mail some things out. So our building's still open again from that limited time. Our teachers are teaching from home, but I had 2 teachers today that was in the building just because their roommates are also teaching virtually and everyone can't pull on the Wi-Fi. So, but I told them, hey, when you finish, turn your computer off, turn your light off, and different things like that. And so to the staffing piece, you said it best. I think our HR department, we have a protocol in for if teachers get sick, but you're at home. And so unless you're sick and unable to teach, if you're looking bad, then just say, hey, Silas, I'm teaching today with my camera off, but I'm here. And so I think now not being at work, you need to be on bed rest. We have a teacher, and I know she won't mind me saying this, who's pregnant on bed rest, and she's still teaching. So I'm not really sure if anybody else has an excuse, and that would be Ms. Hogan, our teacher leader. She is pregnant on bed rest, and she's still teaching every day and writing Facebook posts. And so it's just when you have teachers that are doing that, I think everyone's saying, okay, that's the mentality. But again, we are aware and empathetic to, you know, if people getting sick and other things like that, but you just have to report it like you would do if we were in the building. So I think, well, Tommy, did you want to talk about some of the resources or do you want to kind of go, because I did have a question for one of my parents that I wanted to get to, and then we kind of do closing thoughts. How do you want to close this out?
Yeah, let me just name the resources so folks who are listening know what's coming, because we'll put the links out. We have a shared Google Drive where we've been collecting resources from others and sharing the resources that we use. It's not hyper organized, but we've just been dumping in there. So you can go in and you can dig around, and there's some nuggets in there that are great. Everything from staff incentives to engagement and attendance trackers, it's all there. The other thing is the National Center for Special Education and Charter Schools, NCSECs. We'll have some links to them, their top 10 resources. They're an amazing resource for supporting special education, especially through COVID. And then out of New York City through Brooklyn Lab Schools, educatingalllearners.org is just an amazing site. They've spent a lot of time putting together resources that can be shared nationally. So we'll have all those links for you.
So with our closing thoughts, I think we'll definitely close with maybe each individual person will say something about why we do this. And as they speak, I'll put their email up for you to contact them. But I also want us to each talk about, maybe Tommy, me, you can do it or whoever, the implications beyond 2021. And so what that looks like. And so I think, honestly, the first thing is we know, as we talked about, there was a summer loss and there's going to be what we call a COVID loss with lost learning. But I do want to frame and give folks a different mindset. While I do understand that there will be an academic loss when you talk about ELA and math, I do want to celebrate. Let's talk about the skills that kids are being able to get. And one of those is this. I have 4th graders going in their email and emailing their teacher a question about an assignment. Now, when I was in fourth grade, couldn't email. I don't think I really used email effectively until college. But we have fourth graders who are logging into their emails, typing their teacher name in, creating a subject, and putting a body and sending an email. Like that, to me, while we are maybe losing something when it comes to ELA standards and math standards for Common Core, the skills that our kids are getting, the technology literate, is something that we should celebrate and we should heighten up and talk about more. And so we're all working to closing the gaps. I think the biggest question for our Indiana folks and maybe some folks around the country is, what about assessments? We did have our fourth graders take the iRead solely because of the data, right? It's like when you go to the doctor. I get my blood pressure checked because I want to know what it is. It wasn't punitive. It wasn't like, well, you know what? You didn't pass. You're going back to third. We just needed to know the data because we didn't get that option. And I think if we frame our mindset about data that way, whether it's in person, if you create your own in-house assessments, I think we have to do some form of assessment to gauge where students are, not just benchmarks periodically, but at the end of the year as well. So I don't really know what we're going to do as a network, or honestly what our state's going to do. We did, our governor did just elect appoint a new Secretary of Education for our city that's new. And so I'm sure the DOE, as they're talking about 8AF framework, is probably going to talk about that. But I think there has to be some way where you gauge student achievement. And so you can have a plan. Otherwise, you're shooting in the dark. And we've done that for too long. And so those would be my thoughts. And so interested to hear from Paramount, what you guys are thinking for implications moving forward.
Yeah, you stole my thunder with your doctor argument. That was almost word for word the analogy I was going to make. So I'm just going to try to one-up it and say that if a child breaks a bone and the parent looks at the child and says, you know what, taking you to the emergency room right now would just stress you out too much. You've already had this traumatic incident. So let's just sit down on the couch for a while and chill, and we'll deal with other stuff later.
Exactly.
That's the thought for a lot of people right now on assessments. That child needs to go immediately to the emergency room, get assessed, because the child has an immediate trauma. That trauma needs figured out. Like, we need to get to the exact standard that's broken there, the exact bone that's broken, apply the right fix to it so the child can heal successfully and get through it. I mean, that's the whole purpose behind data. That's exactly your doctor's thing too. It's like, when there's a bad problem, you need to diagnose it. And data-driven learning is all about diagnosing the problem. And there's never been a more important time to assess a child than now. Like, we really have to jump on this. And, we can't be scared to over-traumatize a traumatized situation. Yes, it's traumatized. Let's get to the bottom of it. Let's apply SEL supports, but let's get right in and find where the standards are weak and start addressing them so we don't lose the child through the process. Other implications, I think that as we look into the crystal ball, we need to be prepared to stay in virtual learning through May. I think that there's a really good chance we come out before then. I've even heard rumors as early as today saying that we could pop out K-5 in the very near future, completely unsubstantiated, but there's a lot of speculation. But we can't speculate on the possibility of change. We can only speculate on the possibility of staying exactly how we are. That's the only safe play right now, is saying that this is going to go for the rest of the school year. So let's tackle it like that's going to happen. I do feel, looking in the crystal ball, very confident that we'll be back in schools on campus in the fall. I feel like we see enough trending data in vaccine and politics that I think we're going to get there. What it looks like when we get there won't be the same. I think it'll be better. I think we've learned a ton. I think we've pushed the technology envelope, the tech literacy envelope, and we've advanced education in the U.S. through the pandemic. It's a fortunate side effect of a really bad situation. So I wouldn't say I'm thankful for the pandemic in any way, but I do think that we'll see some great gains in tech literacy and tech supports for children. And Kyle, if you wouldn't mind touching on just real quick, because we're really late, to sum up real quick, we did a pre-test, post-test model in the fourth quarter last year through COVID with Edulastic, and we were able to show some things, and we know we're going to be dealing with some gaps, but I think Kyle can articulate that a little bit.
Yeah, so we got together as a leadership team probably in mid-March, and we talked about what can we do to accurately gauge growth from beginning of virtual learning in late March all the way until the end of the year in May. We developed a test along with our site level teams that mirrored iLearn. In the absence of iLearn, our students were taking a test that was based on the iLearn blueprints in ELA and math. It was rigorous. It was high depth of knowledge. It included writing performance tasks, technology enhanced items that you would see on the assessment. And again, the blueprints aligned to the assessment itself. It was really neat and advantageous to us in two ways. One, it showed that we were able to show some pretty solid growth, especially in math, but even in ELA, from beginning of e-learning to the end with 8-week window. The other thing we did was we did a standard deep dive into how our students perform within each power standard. That helped us launch this year of instruction in terms of putting together our yearly curriculum maps and putting our kids in the best position to be successful by breaking down what standards we were strong in and what standards we needed to emphasize a little bit more heading into this school year. So we're really excited with the results. And I think to echo what Tommy said, we need to continue to stay with our finger on the pulse of student data. There's never been a more important time.
Absolutely.
And we need to remember we're dealing with two factions here. If this was purely a virtual school for parents, like I mentioned earlier, then we'd have a lot of parents ready to support their child through this process. But because it's being forced on our parent population and our school populations, there's always going to be a percentage that isn't prepared to deal with this, didn't want to deal with this, is uncomfortable dealing with this. And so some of our truths going forward is that we're going to create percentage-based gaps on these families who don't have the capacity or desire to support virtual instruction from the home. So I think we're generating larger academic gaps between our virtual students right now and our on-campus students prior than you would see even in a regular on-campus scenario where you've got families maybe with a child in a virtual school and a child in an on-campus situation. Because in a regular society without pandemic, you have parents who want their kids in that virtual site. So we have to accept that there's going to be academic trauma and be ready to deal with that and be able to ramp up from a data-driven perspective when we come out of it.
Absolutely. So folks, again, thank you for joining us. As we close out, I want to give each person an opportunity, 20, 30 seconds to just give closing thoughts. For those still watching, I'm going to put up as they talk the solo screen and their email address. And then those that are listening, we'll say our email addresses, but we'll share this out. I'm encouraging those that are listening to this live and maybe listen to this later, share this. There's a lot of great resources. Again, we put each of our websites on there, and we'll share that when we share this link out. So I'll start it first since I'm going. If you want to contact me, it's McGuire@Tindley.org. I leave with what I always tell my staff. You know, we always ask a simple question of how are the children, and the children are well, the nation will prosper. And all this is about making sure that the children are well. And so I encourage everyone to let's focus on the children and who need to receive the education, but approach it with a bit of grace, some patience, and some empathy, and we'll all get through this together. Tina, if you want to give some closing thoughts next, and I'll put up your. Oh, I'm sorry. It's McGuire@Tindley.org. McGuire@Tindley.org.
Yeah, I think my biggest thing is I'm very passionate about education and specifically the foundation of education. And I hear a lot of we immediately when we go virtual, we have parents saying, "Well, you can't retain my kid because we went virtual," but we have worked very hard to make sure that our kids have everything they need to continue schooling. And because we continued with our curriculum to provide that foundation, while we do have grace and empathy for every situation, we also have very high expectations for our kids and our families. And the only way that this is successful is with all of us working together, the parent, the teacher, the child, the administration. It takes all of us. And so we need the kids online. So that's the parent piece. Our teachers are working so hard. I'm so proud of the staff at Tindley Summit. I think I say it to Mr. McGuire every day, just how in awe I am of them and our scholars. The ones that are getting on are doing such an amazing job and just rolling with the punches. And so I just want us to keep moving forward like we were in school, those high expectations, and that kids are learning.
Who wants to go next from the Paramount group? I'll get you going.
Yeah, I'll go next.
Okay.
I just first off want to thank David and the whole Tindley team, Dr. Metcalf. I think what's prominently amazing with what we've just witnessed, if you've gone through this whole thing with us tonight, or if you're listening to this later as a recording, is the collaborative component here. We tend to build silos around ourselves, and those silos stop us from sharing best practices, stop us from helping others in the field, from lifting others up who might be struggling in areas that we had no idea. There just isn't a good model in place for something like this to happen and keep happening. And it's a real break in our sector. It's not only a break between charter schools and traditional public schools, or private schools and charter schools. It's a break even between charter schools in the same city that aren't talking and collaborating and sharing, and public schools in the same city. Like, we have a sector that refuses to learn from itself, and it slows everything down. And the common denominator of hurt there is the kids. So the more we can talk like this and share like this, the more excited I get. This is one of the cooler things I've ever done in education because of how collaborative it's been and how much information we threw into a 2-hour conversation. So big thanks to everybody.
Who wants to go next?
I'm happy to jump in, and David and Tina, just want to shout you two out specifically. It was awesome to be on with you tonight, and you're two solutions-based leaders, and that's what kids and staff need during times like this. So just awesome being on with you guys tonight, you both. In terms of takeaways, lots to glean from this, from the Tindley side, and certainly we hope from the Paramount side, folks got some things they can take away and integrate into their own systems. We're excited about how we're pushing forward and moving forward, and certainly with the collaboration that we've had with Tindley tonight as well. I'll leave with this. It's something I continue to say over and over. It's during this time, this can be awfully isolating to teachers, to students, and to families. Intervene early, intervene often, I think is the most important takeaway I can give tonight. I think it's important that we continue to communicate effectively and purposefully with all stakeholders through this process to get us all through it. So intervening early and often with all stakeholders, teachers, students, families is the most important thing. And I just really enjoyed the evening.
Jess?
So I always like to look for the positives anytime we have something that's really negative. And so one of the great outcomes of this pandemic has been how school leaders from across the state have worked together to do what's best for kids and teachers. It looks different at each of our school sites, but we're all working towards the same goal, and we're all helping each other get there. So we've really gained a support system, I feel like, that we didn't have prior to this. And then another win is just the amount of self-regulation our students have shown through this process. I have an 8-year-old, and this was definitely not the case prior to him being in virtual learning, but he gets himself up, he gets ready for his day, he logs into his platform, he's in charge of his own schedule, asks for help when it's needed. And those are job skills. And so those are a lot of things that our kids wouldn't be able to necessarily acquire given the platform that they were currently in on-campus learning. So another great outcome of this is our kids are ready to be able to self-regulate their workload in a way that's effective for them.
And Darius.
Yeah, definitely. When I think about just closing words, this is something that Paramount Schools of Excellence across all 3 schools has truly adopted, is just adopting a mantra. And our mantra right now is don't flinch. And I think that's so important, not only for staff, just again, going day in and day out and being flexible and, just truly embracing the role that you play in the system at your school, but also for students and for parents. We all are going to continue to be flexible. So the more and more that we just embrace our flexibility and not flinch at our current circumstance, just the better we'll be coming out of the situation.
That is awesome. And again, folks, I want to thank everyone again for tuning in. Again, we'll share this recording. It's been an honor and a privilege to collaborate with the Paramount team. I know we're going to still collaborate and share resources. We hope that those that listen, that you reach out to us and you join the collaboration with us. I'm going to share some resources tomorrow with Tommy to drop in that online thing and some things that we're doing that we touched on, scheduling and different things like that, just so folks can have varieties and options. But it's been a great evening. Everyone take care, and we'll get through this together.